Hello, everyone. Welcome to the TDWI webinar program. I'm Jim Powell, Editorial Director at TDWI, and I'll be your moderator. For today's program, we're going to talk about 5 strategies for driving data agility, quality, and governance. Our sponsor is Talend. For our presentations today, we'll first hear from David Stodder with TDWI. After Dave speaks, we have presentations from Bill Bush from Proficient and Michael Destine with Talend. Before I turn things over to our speakers, I'd like to go over a few basics. Today's webinar will be about an hour long. At the end of their presentations, our speakers will host a question and answer period. If at any time during these presentations you'd like to submit a question, just use the Ask a Question area on your screen to type in your question and send it over. If you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, click on the Help area located below the slide window and you'll receive technical assistance. If you'd like to discuss this webinar on Twitter with fellow attendees, just include the hashtag TDWI in your tweets. Finally, if you'd like a copy of today's presentation, use the Click Here for a PDF line there on the left middle of your console. In addition, we are recording today's event and we'll be emailing you a link to an archived version so you can view the presentation again later if you choose or share it with a colleague. Okay, again, today we're going to be talking about 5 strategies for driving data agility, quality, and governance. Our first speaker today is David Stodder, Senior Director of Research for Business Intelligence at TDWI. As an analyst, writer, and researcher, Dave has provided thought leadership on key topics in BI, analytics, IT, and information management for over 2 decades. Previously, he headed up his own independent firm and served as Vice President and Research Director with Ventana Research. He was the founding editor of Intelligent Enterprise, a major publication and media site dedicated to the BI and data warehousing community, and served as editorial director there for 9 years. With TDWI Research, Dave focuses on providing research-based insight and best practices for organizations implementing BI, analytics, performance management, and related technologies and methods. David, I'll turn things over to you here.
Jim, thank you very much, and thank you to everyone who's joining us today. Welcome. It's great to have you here. Hope everyone's having a good day. So I'm going to talk first about some research insights that we've got around these topics. So we're talking about 5 strategies for driving data agility, quality, and governance. And so I'll go through those things and then offer some my 5 strategies for those areas. So just to start off, just to kind of get a lay of the land, so it's good to sort of look at and see, we can see that there's what's driving the demand for agility, quality, and governance. And I think it's really those 3 things that without them, it's impossible to meet the initiatives that organizations want around data-driven business processes, decision-making, using information more effectively, and how users inside the organizations collaborate and also outside the organization with partners and customers. And so right now, certainly it's a dynamic environment. There's no doubt about that. We've all been experiencing a lot over the last year or so, and it looks like it's going to continue for a bit. And you know, so it's hard to know what's ahead. So this is where it's really important to have good information, good data, and to feed into the decision-making in this kind of dynamic environment. And often the old patterns are outmoded, things that may have been pushed aside during the upheavals of the pandemic. Well, now it's looking like, in fact, those patterns aren't really going to work anymore, and so we need new ones. And so, again, need information to drive that. We see in our research 54% they need new analytics, and we have other kinds of data around that to kind of support that thought that that organizations really need to respond with new ways of looking at things and be able to innovate. The other thing, of course, is going on right now along with this is really this long digital transformation that's been going on for some time but has been accelerating, where organizations are taking processes that were those legacy kind of processes, often maybe paper-based even, scattered around the organization. They want to transform them, and this is where the cloud certainly is playing a central role, try to move these systems into the cloud. And again, that central role for data and analytics, sort of seeing that it's important as you transform the data, the processes into the cloud or into more digital platforms, that you're beginning to figure out what to do with all this data that these systems are now generating. And this makes it a priority to address the data choke points. So understand where are the quality inconsistencies. That's often an issue. Where are governance vulnerabilities? So where might there be sensitive data that is now exposed and that need to be better protected and have good processes there? So I'll talk about that more later. And then the other is organizations, as they do this, are often trying to meet customer-centric goals. They want to have customer 360. In other words, get a complete perspective of what their customers' behavior, their preferences, their experiences are. They want insights so they can enrich those experiences. They want to drive smarter marketing and do things like be able to predict lifetime value of customers, to know better share of wallet, things like that. The understanding, what do customers really want? When do they need it in the sort of life cycle of an experience with a customer? So these are all initiatives that demand all three of these things, and I'll be talking about more as we go forward. So what does this mean for just thinking about data and the workloads, what users want? Well, one is a focus on speed and reducing latency. So we see in our research, one of the first things that organizations or even users say right away is that they don't have the information they need when they need it. So they need actionable information. So 67% saying that this would improve if they invested in technologies for faster data. And so this can be anywhere from the pipelines, the systems, and then even just processes, sort of the more human-oriented processes that we'll be talking about in the webinar today. 39% say situation awareness and alerting would improve if they invested in these technologies. 37% would they be able to improve customer engagement and personalization. So a lot of issues that I don't have for 56% saying operational decisions and management. So trying to extend that to the further into their operations. Competition certainly favors speed. So faster predictive and proactive response to customer behavior is something that customers certainly recognize right away and is a competitive differentiator. So with this need to support the full spectrum of workloads. So you've got lots of different kinds of users, whereas maybe before you had just business analysts or maybe even just IT developers working with the data. Now you've got all the way from executives and managers consuming data to data scientists who are trying to do more experimenting with data, more exploration with data. And there's room for improvement in all these areas. And, of course, you need to take advantage of the cloud, because this is where you can get that elasticity of the cloud, being able to bring systems up and down as needed, the scalability as you need to add things, and increase speed. Okay, with those kind of preamble remarks, let me look at 5 strategies here. So one is to increase code-free automation. So this is one of the first things, because we see that around data, around the use of data, the sourcing of data, transformation of data, developing pipelines, there's often a lot of manual work. And this is the source of delays and inconsistencies and lack of transparency, because everybody's doing things differently. You don't know what's going on. And so being able to move towards more automation, a more code-free environment, basically, this can improve in all of these areas. So, and we see here that organizations are struggling. Automating repetitive tasks, only 9% report that they're very successful. 38% say they're somewhat successful. 27% say that they're not at all successful. So those are numbers that really need to improve in organizations. Manual work, as I mentioned, on data transformation, quality, and governance, it crowds out time for analytics, because everyone is too busy just sort of futzing with the data to improve the data. So 34% saying data transformations, they're too slow and difficult to manage. And then about half, or 49%, say that their users in their organization are spending 60% or more of their time just preparing the data. So that's time that they can't do analytics. So that would be a recommendation there, is to move toward code-free automation. It should be a priority as you migrate from legacy tools to the modern cloud-based systems. And this will help reduce the risks due to the inconsistencies, because you don't know what's going on, and the inability to see or improve those processes. And often behind this, it's about AI and automation coming together for smarter automation, so not just automating things that you've been doing before, but finding ways to do it better. Okay, number 2, take advantage of the cloud to integrate the data warehouse and data lakes. And here, this is addressed as an issue we see, is that organizations have often moved into the cloud in a kind of a piecemeal fashion. They've got a lot of silos. And this is as things are growing. So we see here that the data warehouse and data lakes, about 40% of those we've researched say they have one or both and often both. Data lakes being often spread around through object storage systems that they're setting up, so they might have many data lakes at this point, where the data is there and they're not really getting the value out of it. The data is increasing, but its access is actually getting more complicated. And so there's a need for really a holistic view to be able to see all of these systems and have tighter integration of all of these systems. Because it's a management problem. Organizations have little knowledge of the data patterns. They don't know who's building pipelines, what the pipelines are connecting to. They don't know who's sharing the data. They can't share good routines for data transformations and so forth. And so this needs to be something that's better in organizations because it's contributing to a lot of inefficiency and actually governance issues. So I think this year one of the real buzz kind of concepts, and I think a lot of organizations are interested in this, is the idea of a cloud data lakehouse, which is where you're just trying to bring together these data warehouse and data lake systems so that you can support both the kind of traditional business intelligence workloads you might have had with the data warehouse with the more data science-oriented AI, machine learning kind of workloads that make data lakes so important in organizations. And also because the data scientists often need to access the data warehouse as well, and vice versa. A lot of BI users are trying to get to more types of data. So if you can bring these systems together, there can be a move towards reducing redundancy, so there's less redundant systems. You begin to have a better just data management, and can begin to optimize these systems more effectively. So that would be the takeaway for number 2. Number 3 would be improved data quality workflows. Data quality is a high priority. We see when we ask what could be done to improve your BI and analytics, data quality is almost always at the top, and here we can see 66% of organizations surveyed say that. But it's getting more challenging. Challenges grow as there's more data, more complexity. There are more manual processes, often a lot of spreadsheet use still to improve data quality and do transformations, a lot of custom coding, and so it's difficult to get on top of all this. It's a big issue in user frustration. Users get frustrated with the data quality and then often go back to kind of doing the old way they did it. And organizations are discovering really as they've set up those BI and data warehouses that one-size-fits-all approach, maybe for certain kinds of reports or certain predictable queries, doesn't work for all users. So as users become more diverse, the data quality processes that organizations have don't really fit anymore. Spending time just trying to transform the data is arguing about who has the right data. So it's important to get that big picture, the holistic perspective, and improve data quality workflows to improve trust. So you want to get an idea of the end-to-end quality processes from the sourcing of the data through the transformations and to the final target systems and use cases. Improve data stewardship and mentoring. And this is something we do see organizations very interested in doing. 53% are doing it, meaning that you're assigning both IT developers, business users to share their expertise and mentor new users in particular to understand where they can get quality data, what can be done to improve the quality as they source data and so forth. So obviously take this as a very high priority. Number 4 is to focus on empowering the range of users. So as I mentioned, with digital transformation, often inviting a lot more users to be able to access systems, get to the data, and have that kind of relationship with the data systems that they may not have had before. And this is where agility is so important because you've got a lot of different kinds of users, and it's key to satisfying that range of users. In our research, we do see the business analysts, who are often the most experienced with data compared to others at least, are the most satisfied, but improvement is really needed for data scientists. We see them getting bogged down in, as I mentioned before, that long preparation cycle, so they can't really focus on what they intended to do. But you've got more users like external business partners and third-party developers, and these are the least satisfied. And as organizations, again, try to share analytics, share data, move faster by inviting in third-party developers to build systems, this is becoming an issue. The integrated data lakehouse, which can support that broad range of users, can be very important. And this is, again, a step of moving away from those disconnected, kind of hard-to-scale data silos that limit the breadth of interaction. So you're getting that holistic view and integrating the systems, which actually can make it easier to empower that broader range of users. And then aligning the vision of data interaction with business goals. So again, not one-size-fits-all, but then you don't want all users just sort of scattered out doing their own thing without any of that kind of holistic direction. So you're going to need a lot of different things: fast raw data for data science, but then you also need high-speed prepared data for data consumption, in BI dashboards. So look at how you can empower that entire range. And then underlying all of it needs to be governance. That's number 5. So regulatory adherence is the number 1 priority in governance because of privacy regulations, and as I mentioned, digital transformation often brings in more customer touch points, and so you need to be thinking about protecting that sensitive data from customers and consumers. And make governance part of the responsibility and accountability for data. So as more users do self-service and source the data, they need to be thinking about, does this adhere to the governance rules? Are there issues that could be coming up? So self-service and governance challenges, we see 52% saying self-service is a challenge for governance, 43% having that lack of visibility, so again, the need for that holistic view. 23% saying they have trouble controlling access and authentication in organizations as they expand out into more kinds of users. So these are things that need to be dealt with, and often one of the first really positive steps can be to establish the center of excellence, where you bring together the stakeholders, the people, the process, people remedy, well, it's a people and process remedy because you need to bring together these people from IT, from business, from the developer community to understand governance and what needs to be done. Okay, those are my 5 points, and I want to get a little audience participation here. So let's hear from our audience about what is your biggest challenge in providing data quality and governance to meet business needs. Is it the people and process issues that you struggle to get leadership and stakeholders together? Is it about the data silos, as I mentioned, it's kind of scattered across organizations, so your data is distributed in multiple silos? Is there too much manual work, so you're not taking advantage of the opportunities for automation? So you don't have the right tools to monitor and gain end-to-end holistic view. Either scalability problems, you struggle with just the quantity of the data and the speed of data workflows. Or is it something else? And here you can enter in the Ask a Question box, and we'll discuss it when we get to the Q&A part of our webinar. All right, let's see what the answers are. We can see here that, wow, almost 40% is saying it's people and process, so it's really not even about the technology, it's just getting the leadership and stakeholders together. Yeah, and we do see that in our research. That's often the case. Although a pretty good percentage say data silos. Yeah, there's too much distributed data. 23 or almost 24% is too much manual work, so need better tooling there and better use of automation. And scalability, actually a lesser problem for our audience today. This is very interesting. Okay, good. More to discuss going forward. Jim, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thank you, Dave. Just a quick reminder to our audience, if you have a question, you can enter it at any time in the Ask a Question window. We'll be answering audience questions in the final portion of our program. Our next speaker is Bill Bush, Chief Data Strategist from Perficient. Bill leads the big data practice at the company, providing visionary direction and development for its big data capabilities. Bill brings over 25 years of experience helping organizations transform data management, analytics, and governance tools and practices. And he has led many mission-critical data and cloud transformation programs. Welcome, Bill.
Hey, thank you, Jim. It's good to be here today. So, we're going to talk a little bit more about data agility, and really we're going to focus in on two areas, capability management and data quality. Now, what's interesting is that last poll question that we had really highlights this capability management. It's a lot of times not about the technology, it's around the people and process, so we'll be diving into that today. So just as a, let's get down to some numbers around this, is that, those companies that do invest in this digital transformation, when something happens in the market, so we had a huge event last year with COVID, and certain companies were able to react to it, and certain companies were a little bit slower to react with. Domino's in particular reacted quite quickly. They identified that pizza was going to be something that people were going to want to have delivered to their house, but they also identified, or they had this idea of really was one of the first around contactless delivery and having a process around that and they wanted, what they were able to do relatively quickly was roll that out to all their thousands of stores, and they could actually see that, and it, turn around, and they saw a huge increase in same-store sales third quarter last year, right in the height of COVID. Now, why do I bring some of this up is really around, this is really around analytics for agility. It's like you got to be able to make decisions, and you got to trust the data that you have to make those decisions, right? And then the third is the data's got to really kind of be in the right place at the right time. So as we see companies, as they mature in their use of data analytics, we really start down here and just like there's the digital transformation functions, kind of marketing, right? We're going to use data there or in some of our operations. And as they mature, what ends up happening is you end up at this platform strategy where your whole business platform is really built on analytics. You could think of Uber is a great example of that, but any of these modern, Facebook and even Tesla are just the foundation of those companies is really all about data and using that data. And then everything that you go do, every process you go do, you want to collect data, analyze that data, and then constantly improve that process. So we kind of call this like the Uberization of a business, right? Where do they get that from? Is that really Uber? If you think about Uber is really automating a lot of all their decisions. All right, so every time you get a car from Uber, there's a ride price that has to be displayed. There's a price back to the driver, and then there's a matching that happens between the two, and so that's all automated. And you got to have trust that the models that you put out there are good models, and that's really comes into really trusting the data. You also have that idea of a real-time decision that has to be made. So, Uber tends to be the exception, though. If we go look at and do some surveys out there, what we see with the research is a lot of companies are struggling with this agility, getting the data out, making these decisions fast, using AI. We're seeing that almost 2/3 of the companies out there take over 7 to 18 months to get an idea, an analytical idea, or from all the way to production. And that really is too long. And really, this is where we have spent a lot of our time with research and our clients of helping them with this challenge. So there's, when we start pulling back the onion on how, data is used for an analytical decision, what we start seeing is that there's a process for this. This process, we can argue a little bit about the pieces here, but basically what you have is over half of that process, and usually about 70–80% of the time, is spent managing data. And that's why data agility really drives business agility, because if you cannot operate on your data fastest, your data is not fast and supporting your business, you're not going to be able to make those decisions fast. So from discovering and finding data, acquiring data, cleansing that data, enriching that data, and then you got to split the data for your analytical models to train it and test it. There is a huge amount of work that has to be done here. So, what we really talk about is that data requires a capability focus, right? And a capability is basically people, process, and technology. It comes from the military, where they talk about capabilities. Let's pick up this whole military unit and put it anywhere in the world in 24 hours with all its equipment. What are all the things that we need to be able to do that? We need not only the the equipment to move, the airplanes and what have you to move the equipment, but you also need to have processes, and you need to be able to load those planes up. You need to have people trained. This is where this idea of capability comes from. But when we go in and talk to clients, what we see here is that we see a lot of architecture diagrams, but we don't see many process diagrams. We haven't, people have moved to the cloud, and they're wondering why it takes the same amount of time or to really create data pipelines, or they really haven't gotten that data agility that they expected by moving to some of these newer technologies. And a lot of it comes back to, well, what are you focusing on? Are you focusing on just the technology, or are you focusing on really the capability to, maybe build a data pipeline in a day? So, with that, capability is basically people, process, and technology, right? You got to address all three of these to have a capability. So the capability to build a data pipeline, you can have Talend out there, but Talend by itself is not going to go and build a data pipeline by itself. Now, maybe eventually with AI, it will get close to that, but at some level, you're going to have a people trained in skills. You're going to have this culture of kind of more agility, agile development. And then you're going to have processes. We come in and help clients with putting in factory processes and applying factory automation to data pipelines. Going to true agile delivery models and really standardizing how they go build these and the different patterns for that. And then the technology itself, which I think a lot of people do understand, it's got to be scalable. The cloud helps us there, extendable, and functional as well. And where we start thinking about this is that really our clients or just companies that have been very successful in data pipelines and managing their data as a capability, what you start seeing is that they start treating it like a factory production line. So, a pod or a team, an agile development team, is kind of a production line, and they really start managing it like we would manage a factory. We get statistics about it. We understand where there's quality issues. We go correct those quality issues, and it's really around continuous improvement. And what you end up with here is you get something where you're the consumer, right? So the consumer might be your business partners, your stakeholders that are going to get the value of these data pipelines. You're going to have them see a lower overall cost and most of the time a higher speed, quite a bit of higher speed to delivery. The other thing is that you're manufacturing, the IT organization in most cases, they see a benefit because they get much more predictable demand. They know how much they can sign up for, and over time, the lower, they see lower cost in because of efficiency. And so, if you go look at things, what we need to be focusing on, a lot of times we come in and we buy a tool like Talend, we go implement it, we get the DevOps up and running and what have you, and then it kind of stops there. We've already trained our people and what have you, but really there's a lot more than just landing the tool and getting people trained on it that you could focus on. There's a lot of processes out there that you can go automate and bring a lot of automation to, from the acquisition and ingestion of data. If you're going to go the first step in moving data to a data lake is taking the raw data from a source system and moving it into a ingested or into a raw data lake or raw area of a data lake, then that's something that can be completely metadata driven. You give some security parameters and you give some, I want to move this table, then the tool should be fast enough and smart enough to go and move that data for you without having to do a lot of programming and so on. So there's a lot of automation that can be brought in that. Curation and standardization. If you have standards out there, let's do tests to go curate this. Governance and approvals. A lot of times in organizations, that's the long arm in the temple, is getting approvals to actually move something into a data lake. And then, of course, just configuration versus code is that, we want to try to make everything, that we go and deliver a pipeline or use to develop a pipeline or analytics or something along those lines. We want to make it as configuration friendly as possible and not have to really get into writing a lot of code. The whole thing about data factory, design patterns, once you have a design pattern, then you can go start automating and improving certain parts of that pattern as far as how fast you can deliver it. So again, these are production line concepts, and really it's really focused around continuous process improvement. Once we implement a tool, we don't stop there. We want to continually improve it, improve our capability to deliver value from that tool. And then the last one is pretty obvious, I think, is agile program management, and that really gets into this continuous improvement. And a lot of times we just talk about delivering technology, an ETL or some type of analytics or a report using an agile process. But we should be using that to also continually improve data quality and continually improve our ability to deliver that fast and faster. To the next one here. So the capability management is one of those pieces that companies have challenges with. But the other thing is that if I'm going to make a decision, I'm an executive, and I'm going to make a decision based on analytics, based on data, then I got to be able to trust that. Well, what we're seeing out there is that there's not that much, the trust is a factor. We saw a couple statistics at TDWI. David from TDWI kind of highlighted, and there's other, from Forrester, there's statistics there that, our customer data and our operational data, there's definitely considerable quality issues that we see. And that really slows down that decision-making process, because now that says, I can go challenge the data if I don't like the decision, things along those lines. And the bottom line to this is that when we go in and talk to stakeholders at a lot of our clients, the business executives really feel like they have no view into data management and data quality. They understand the data, they understand what kind of metrics drive their business, but how it gets there, they really don't have that much visibility to. And when they go and ask questions, it really comes back as a black box. We in IT a lot of times will talk to them at such a detailed level, technical level, that it goes that we're not answering the question at the right level that the executives need. And this is very important. When we get into regulatory issues, especially around financial services, this is also very important, where there's got to be visibility on how the data was processed. So that leads in kind of in the next slide here is that, the data agility requires trust in data. So in other words, you got to be able to trust the data that you have out there. The first thing is really around quantifiable data quality. In other words, do I even know what kind of my data quality is? I personally have been in consulting for about 10 years, or actually 11 years now. I probably have had about 100 clients, and when I've asked in just about all, but actually I had my first about 2 weeks ago, asked, about data quality, I get answers back saying, yeah, we have issues here. We have issues with our customer addresses or our demographic data. We have all these issues or whatever, but no one ever can quantify that for me. And if you're going to go talk to an exec, about data quality and what have you, they're going to want to know some kind of quantification around that, especially if they need to invest in improving it. So, your key performance indicators, key metrics, we should be able to go measure. We should be able to set goals up around those. A lot of those goals will then come back and be dictated by our clients, or when I say our clients, I mean our stakeholders in the business. We should have visibility into it, so we should have reports and dashboards that show data quality. We should also have issue management. In other words, I don't think everybody expects, or most executives expect everything to be perfect, but what they do is you should know what's not perfect, and you should be managing to make that improve those areas of that need to be improved. And then, when we go back to known data processing, all right, so the first is how's the quality of my data? The next piece is really, can you even tell me where this data is from? This gets into lineage and kind of, first of all, where is the data? Did you get it from the data lake? Did you get it from the, my POS system, one of my source systems, or what have you? That's important because usually the execs know where the good data is. What is the data? So do you have a definition? A lot of times you have a sales number. I know that when I worked for a large retailer, we had actually two different sales numbers, one based on how much labor it took to generate the sale, and another one was how much money was actually brought in at the POS system at the register that day. There were two different numbers. So you have to understand the data definition as well. The data catalogs, like Talend data catalogs, is a great example of that. And then what has been done to the data? Have I transformed the data? This is really getting into financial services. This is a huge area that that you have to have lineage. You have to understand how the data has been processed or touched in order for regulators to believe that you actually have control over your data. So kind of bringing this all together, it's like, well, okay, I've talked about two things, but really in these agile processes, and I've kind of touched on this, is that, we do tend to focus kind of on the business and technical use cases, the things outside of that little red circle or oval, and maybe architecture we might bring into some changes and things like that. But a lot of times in our projects and in our programs, we don't really bring into this agile process to continually improve our ability to deliver and to deliver better. So, that includes the data quality issue management and resolving those issues, and the process and governance around, actually automating a lot of our processes and governance so we can deliver faster and better. So, with that, I'm going to wrap it up. And, just a little final thought is that there's a lot here. People do tend to focus on technology, and we think a little bit too much, and we need to focus on these capabilities and data quality and put our effort there. It can be daunting because a lot of times you're changing culture of a company, but, Ralph Waldo Emerson basically said that which we persist in doing becomes easier. And I think that that's one of the things that just about every one of our clients that we worked with and that we've been successful with is that once we get them on this agile path, once we get them on in managing their data quality issues, once we get them on, capability management, it's a struggle at first. There's a lot of reasons why you may not want to go do this, but once we get on there and get people working on it, it becomes easier and easier, and you start driving that cultural change. And before you know it, you've got this, you're delivering a data pipeline in a day. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jim.
Thank you, Bill. Our next speaker is Michael Destine with Talend. Michael's a data junkie. Going back to the 1990s, he has been focused on data integration, data management, and data analytics. With roles in solution architecture, product management, product marketing, industry solutions, sales, and now leading ISV partnerships for Talend, he knows how to apply data and data management to complex business problems and extract superior business results. Hello, Michael.
Hello there, and thank you for having me on today. I appreciate everyone sticking with us through this webinar. I want to talk a little bit about how Talend focuses on governing the data operations. You know, what you've heard so far is around the people and the process. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the technology aspects that Talend provides to help those people and processes achieve their goals. Let me first talk a little bit about some key customers. One of the major data lake houses and data lake architectures is Databricks, as we all know, and so I'm going to focus a little bit about on that type of architecture. But we've been working with Databricks with a number of customers. Some examples of those are we're doing accelerated drug development at a major pharmaceutical company. And what that means is that that organization is very data driven. They've got a lot of testing and a lot of product development going on, on the manufacturing floor as well as in the lab, and they need to combine that data into intelligible data sets that can be reviewed by the scientists that are looking at the drugs that they're developing or the vaccines that they're developing. So working with them, we have hundreds of data engineers and thousands of data citizens that are interacting with the data lake using the Talend technologies. Another example is a regional electric company in North America. They have a fleet of trucks that are running around the region, either responding to down power lines or other types of failures in the electrical network. As well, they have some very expensive assets, hydro turbines and things like that. And so, being able to use the Databricks environment to do data science and machine learning about optimizing the fleet and optimizing those assets, Talend is providing the data engineering processes to aggregate the data, consolidate it into common data sets, and deliver that to the machine learning models. And the third example is a top 4 automobile company. This particular organization has made major investments in on-premise Hadoop technologies over the past 10 years. They, like many others, needed and wanted to modernize to take advantage of cloud architectures and the elasticity and the cost savings around managing cloud architectures. But here they had heavy investments in supply chain optimization in a Spark-based environment and that on-prem Hadoop. But with Databricks, they're able to get that cloud architecture. And this customer has been a Talend customer for many years. And because of the approach that we take of a low-code environment, it's very easy for that customer to migrate their data engineering jobs from that on-prem Spark environment to a Databricks environment. So easy. In fact, it's really about just reconfiguring the deployment definitions and then running those new jobs in the Databricks environment in a matter of just weeks to move everything over. So these are just 3 examples of where Talend has been used in the Databricks environment, but the core thread or the common thread around all this is that they're using Talend Data Fabric to govern their data operations. So let's talk about what that means and why they're using Talend for that data lake house. When we look at the data lake, they're providing storage for the data itself, and they're providing different engines to access that data, whether it's a Spark engine or a SQL engine or machine learning and data science technologies. But there is a limit to what they do provide, and many of our customers are looking to govern their entire data operations. The things that they're looking for are, as we kind of heard just a moment ago, is the transparency of the operations. Where is the data flowing? Where did it come from? What changes happened to it along the way? And where did it go? And you want to be able to know that if I make a change, to a source system or to some of the transformation processes, what reports and what machine learning models and so forth might be impacted by that change. And so having that change management capability is important. And then, as the data is moving, you also want to know, what actually moved, what data was successfully taken from the source systems and moved all the way to the financial systems, as an example. The second thing that we're seeing is compliance with organizational standards. So people want to make sure that there's government regulations and standards, there's industry standards and regulations, and then there's company standards. And so most organizations are really struggling with how can they make sure that they're complying with all of those. And a lot of that requires a consistency of the data flows. So knowing how the data is flowing through the system to make sure that because you built that to the standard that was applied, and making sure that all future developments are using that common set of logic. And so having a reusable set of data flow logic is going to be key here. The second thing is around the content or the payload of the data flow itself. So making sure that the data fields themselves are adhering to the organizational standards. If you're a t-shirt company and you have sizes, you want to make sure that the sizes are all consistent or the colors are all consistent. Now, these are just very simple examples. Your organization is going to have much more complex and sophisticated business rules around what constitutes good quality data, but you want to be able to ensure that you can comply with that. And lastly, once the data does comply with those standards, you want someone to validate that. You want a trusted individual in the organization to be able to say, I have reviewed the data content of this table or this set of data, and I certify this data ready for the CFO to use for financial reporting, or for the CMO to use for cross-sell and upsell purposes, or the chief compliance officer to use for regulatory reporting. Third is visibility into the data contained in the lakehouse. So these lakehouses, the great thing about them is that they can store very large quantities of data and very diverse data. The challenge with that is knowing what's actually in there. You don't want it to become a data swamp of just a bunch of data in there with no visibility. And so being able to catalog all of the objects, knowing all the tables that are there, knowing the columns within those tables. And then not just knowing kind of the table names and the column names, but associating those with business definitions and terms. So what does field XYZ in table A17 mean? Well, that's total cost. And what is total cost? Here's how this organization defines total cost. And beyond that, also knowing who's responsible for those definitions, and having a process to manage those definitions along with the quality that we just talked about a moment ago. Now, to do all of that, you need engagement of data citizens. While data engineers are great, they're not necessarily the best equipped to know what constitutes good quality data, not necessarily best to create the business definitions. And so being able to engage with these data citizens, allowing them to understand the content and the quality of the data in easy-to-use tools, letting them define how the data standards work by using spreadsheet types of metaphors to organize the data, apply the data quality functions that they want, and certify that data. And then lastly, being able to view the quality statistics over time to see that, make sure that you're constantly improving. Now, all of that does need to work inside of a data flow. And so having low-code environments will address many of these issues, both from the standpoint of a productivity perspective and a reusability perspective, but also from the standpoint of providing, guide wires, if you will, on how the data flows should be operating. And so having standardized components avoids, rogue developers, if you will, and being able, if you're working inside of a notebook and you have free-form coding, you don't really know what's going to get built into that, process. And so we're seeing that the low-code environments, again, not only provide the productivity to many more users, but it provides that ability to constrain and organize the code in such a way that's consistent with your organization. That also promotes the reuse of the data logic, because now you can define smaller substeps and then have consistency of those substeps across multiple processes. And lastly, no single technology is going to solve the entire data flow. You might have multiple, development tools for your data flows. You might have multiple BI tools for reporting that analysis, and multiple web services or cloud services that are all in combination of the larger data flow. And so you want to be able to orchestrate the complexity around those data flows, being able to touch all of the core processes and organize that into one kind of master flow. And so, as I said, what we're seeing is our customers are calling this governed data operations and being able to apply this. So let's talk a little bit about how Talend addresses those capabilities. At its core, Talend Data Fabric will collect data from all external sources, apply the governance rules around that data, transform the data to a common scheme, and share that data with downstream users. We do that for multiple use cases: cloud migrations, operational machine learning, advanced analytics, and generally data governance, with core business benefits being applied in all cases. From a data integration perspective, we provide a low-code environment that can connect to 100 plus different sources, whether those be legacy systems, on-prem applications, or cloud applications. Within those processes to integrate the data, you can embed data quality throughout the ingestion and integration process. And you can build more jobs, build them faster, and deploy more into your environment, making the best value of the cloud environment. From a data quality perspective, we provide capabilities to really understand what the data quality is from a profiling perspective, and then guide the users on how to improve that data through various data quality functions. We provide a data catalog that acts as that single source of trusted data. It will crawl through the data lakehouse and discover all of the data that's there. It'll orchestrate the processes to curate the data and allow users to find the data in just a few clicks, whether that's through a search bar or through navigating through hierarchies of data. When you see the data and you realize that there are changes or corrections that need to be made, we provide a spreadsheet-based metaphor to allow the user to view the data that's there. Not only are they seeing the columns, but they're seeing samples of the data, and they're seeing statistics on the quality of that data. That user can easily merge data together, combine two columns, or split a column into multiple other columns. You can right-click and set the data domain. Is this a phone number field? Is this a social security number field, et cetera? And when you do that, it then adds the ability to profile the data even closer. So if you do say that it's a North American phone number, it's going to expect the consistency of perhaps the +1 for the country code, the 3-letter area code, the 3-letter prefix, and the 4-digit number. So that combination, within the profiling, it'll tell you whether or not it's meeting that standard. And then you can right-click and add data quality functions to that. All the while, the data prep tools are keeping track of what that user has done, creating a recipe, and that recipe can then be applied into a data flow so that each and every time the data is loaded from a source system into your ingestion area or your raw zone, or it can be applied on a schema on read type of process that every time the user reads that data, those data quality functions will be applied. Now, there are going to be situations where somebody didn't think of the data problem in advance. And in those cases, we can route the data to a data steward who can visually inspect the data, understand what potentially the problem was, potentially correct the data right there and resubmit, or submit a trouble ticket essentially back to the data engineers to fix the data that's being loaded in. And so you can have the full audit trail and track resolution of that information. And lastly, as I mentioned, all of that runs inside of a low-code data engineering environment for Databricks. So whatever you're building across that operation it'll be saved as a visual data flow. But when you go to deploy it, we will generate native Spark code, save that in the Talend Cloud repository. It'll then be scheduled for operations, or it can be invoked from an API perspective. And then those jobs will be deployed to a Databricks cluster, and run as native Databricks jobs. So you get all of the benefits of the governed data operations in the low-code environment, married with all of the benefits of the Databricks runtime environment, the scalability, the elasticity, leveraging the Spark and SQL engines provided by Databricks. So in summary, it's all about ending the data swamps. With the data swamp, you've got dirty data. It's confusing. It's outdated. It's inaccurate. And it's unreliable. By applying Talend Data Fabric, you get a trusted data lakehouse. It'll be thorough. You'll have refined and organized data. It'll be fully transparent, accessible, and understandable to any of the business users. It'll be timely. The data will be delivered on time every time. It'll be traceable, so you know exactly where that data came from and the process that it went through to get into the report or the machine learning model. And lastly, it'll be tested. It'll be rated and certified by authorized users who can attest to the quality of the information. With that, I'll hand it back. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Michael. Let's move into our Q&A period now and answer some audience questions. The first one I have is for Dave. Data quality is a big frustration for users, and it holds us back from getting more value out of the data. So what steps do we take to establish better data quality processes if we don't really have any right now?
Yeah, that is tough because a lot of times, the growth in the data and the use of the data just sort of moves forward, and people aren't thinking about the big picture about data quality. So one is to get better tools, because we often see that data quality is handled kind of by each user, often in a spreadsheet, and so that introduces a lot of inconsistencies, as I mentioned before. So that would be one thing, is there's some, we've talked about it today with Talend, there's some robust tools out there that could be very helpful to both users and to IT to improve data quality. So you need tools that can monitor, and particularly in data pipelines. So a lot of times data pipelines are created, but really data quality could be built into that using tools and better monitoring capabilities to improve it right from the source, because that's often the best way to do it, is to understand, well, what's the sourcing problem, or is that a sourcing problem? Maybe it's a transformation coding issue, or some sort of inconsistency that's being introduced. So that's another good place to start, is to look at those data pipelines, the sourcing, and what's being done there. And I think overall to remember as you go forward that, as I mentioned, no one size fits all. You're going to have some cases where data scientists are going to want raw data. They're actually going to want to look at the dirty data, in a sense, to understand patterns that they can't see in carefully formatted and prepared data. But on the other hand, you're going to have a lot of users who are going to want very prepared data, and so you're going to need to create, again, not only a technology answer, but people and process answers to make sure that everybody's understanding why quality is important, raising the visibility as a business issue, so it's not just a data issue, and work it back that way.
Okay, thanks. Michael, I have a couple of questions for you. Do you also support AWS or Azure data lakes?
Yes, we do. Databricks is just one of the data lake architectures that we support, but we have full support for AWS environments, S3, EMR, Azure Redshift, AWS Redshift, as well as in the Azure environments for ADLS, Azure Synapse, Azure SQL DW, HD Insights. So that is one of the benefits of the Talend technology, is that we are kind of independent of data lake architectures, and we can connect with Snowflake and Databricks and Redshift and Synapse and Google BigQuery and all of those, whether that's as your data technology and architecture matures and changes, we can support you as well. If you have a complex heterogeneous environment, we can support all of those different technologies.
Okay, here's another question for you. Do you offer a business catalog of data definitions?
Yeah, that's what I was mentioning earlier around our data cataloging capabilities, is that we can provide the full business catalog. It's not just the technical metadata, but also all of those business definitions. So being able to, have, business definitions like total cost and profit, and then have those kind of linked to the technical the technical metadata to say not only is this what total profit means, this is how it's calculated, and it draws from these data attributes in the data lake.
Bill, here's a question for you. You mentioned that it takes people, process, and technology. So what's the key part to bringing the people, stakeholders on board to support data agility? What's helped you or worked for you to bring people on board?
I think the number one thing is to get them involved early in the process, and really show how the strategy. Usually, we get involved in a data strategy up front. How that strategy is actually addressing their issues and challenges, especially if those issues and challenges are not just the technology. You got to be able to explain that we're going to really be focused on delivering faster and with better quality, and we're going to be able to identify those issues. I think the presentation that Talend did today on their ability to automate a lot of the data governance and data quality, through data stewardship and the rest of the Talend Data Fabric, is a good way to, when you demo those capabilities, it's a good way to show and bring those users in or those stakeholders in. A picture says 1,000 words in that case.
Okay, thanks. Dave, here's one for you. IT is very concerned about governance because it's IT's responsibility at our firm. However, this is making it slow and difficult for users to get the data they need. So, how do we get the right balance between governance and freer user data access?
Well, again, as I mentioned about data quality, is raising it to a business level. I think that's one thing that's very important, is to make sure the executives are saying that this balance is necessary because we need to govern, but we also need data because we're trying to become more data-driven. So I would say focus first on the sensitive data. So it's not necessarily all the data in the organization that needs to be governed. I mean, maybe eventually, but the number one thing is the sensitive data, particularly around customers and consumers. So you're adhering to the privacy regulations. So you want to have processes in place for that. So you're profiling news sources and so forth for potentially sensitive data. The other, I know Michael talked about data catalog. Data catalog is very useful. So that can be something that can be a central place to help the management, both the management for governance purposes and also to make it easier for users to find the data. So with the catalog, make that findability better, and then also track lineage and so forth for the governance purposes. And then also make sure that it's in sync with data masking and anonymization, those data deduplication procedures, so that you're in sync with security and those authentication and so forth. So I think all of those are good processes that will help the balance.
Michael, I have a question for you. Are you able to show where data came from and where it went, and which reports it was presented in?
Yeah, through our lineage, it's a visual environment. It will show, the source of the data, whether that source, whether that data was sourced maybe in a Databricks notebook and ingested that way, or even some legacy technology like Informatica or IBM DataStage, and so we can show that data coming from its source. Like you said, all the transformations that it went through, to a detailed level. Even if the logic is done in a Databricks notebook, we can even display a lot of the connectivity there and what's going on, and then show where that data flowed into from a Tableau reporting perspective. So if the CFO is asking how did you come up with this total sales number, you can show the CFO in a very visual way. This is exactly how we got to this this number and why, and then you can just have the discussion as to was that the right way or wrong way to do it, or clear up any inconsistencies of what they were expecting.
Here's another one for you, Michael. Does Talend support AS400 DB2 databases?
We do have connectors to those legacy systems so that you can pull data from those, yes.
Okay. Thanks. And Bill, the final question is for you. In one slide you mentioned technology must be scalable, extensible, and functional. What do you mean by extensible and functional? Bill, did we lose you?
Oh, sorry. So extensible is really being able to add capabilities to or integrate that software into your existing capabilities. So the Talend in particular has a number of APIs that allow you to extend it in a number of different ways. We actually have a client that has taken and really put a metadata-driven interface on top of that on Talend, where they just put a table in and some context parameters, and boom, it goes and ingests the data for you. So that's what extensible is. It's also, if you want to be able to put more connectors out there or target connectors to something very specific to your organization, that is also something that obviously Talend does. But then, functional means the software has to do do what it is intended to do. It supports your requirements. So functional might in an ETL tool is basically maybe all the different types of cleansing capabilities or enrichment capabilities or functions to transform data. If you start getting into more analytical tools, it might be, with like a Tableau or a Power BI, it might be how it integrates analytical models into or as metrics. So those are just kind of the features, functionality that has to go back there and support what you're trying to go do. So hopefully that answers that question.
Well, we're out of time here, so let me take a moment to thank our speakers today. We heard from David Stodder with TDWI, Bill Bush with Proficient, and Michael Destine with Talend. Also, again, let me thank Talend for supporting today's webinar. Please remember that we recorded the webinar, and we will be emailing you a link to an archived version of the presentation. Feel free to share that with colleagues. And don't forget, if you'd like a copy of today's presentation, use the click here for a PDF line. Finally, I want to remind you that TDWI offers a wealth of information, including the latest research, reports, webinars, and information on BI, data warehousing, and a host of related topics. So I encourage you to tap into that expertise at tdwi.org. And with that, from all of us here today, let me say thank you very much for attending. This concludes today's event.